Welcome to Modern Anarchy, the podcast featuring real conversations with conscious objectors to the status quo. I'm your host, Nicole.
I tried to keep her quiet, but she's screaming inside of me. I tried to keep her hiding, oh, shut up. I tried to keep her quiet, but she's a wild, wild woman.
On today's episode, we have Michelle High. Join us for a conversation all about how larger systems impact our ability to love. Together, we talk about how the personal is political, growing in relationships, and being turned on by the revolution. Dear listener, welcome to another episode of Modern Anarchy Podcast. I am so delighted that you are here learning about our pleasure and our liberation. I am excited to share this episode with you about the political nature of relationship anarchy and non-monogamy and our ability to love one another. Okay, when we're talking about how larger systems impact our ability to love, I could probably express a whole essay, hours of content, and how these systems impact us. When you're working that 9 to 5 and you come home exhausted without any space to connect with your partner, let alone multiple partners, yeah, that's impacting our ability to love. And my God, that's just a drop of water on how these larger systems are impacting that. So I don't want to try and cover all of them, right, in one conversation or one little intro here. So I'm not even going to try to do that, all right? Instead, we're going to unpack that through conversations and many years of conversation in this space, dear listeners. So I hope you're excited to join me on this ride, to join me on this lifetime of exploration of what it means to be a pleasure radical, a pleasure activist. And I wanted to share something with you, dear listener. I am still shaken up by the reality of this. A few episodes back, I released my episode on why I started wearing my purity ring again, right? That was my birthday episode, taking you, dear listener, into a much deeper dive of my personal story and the ways that I'm showing up in this space and what it means for me to be a divine whore. Now, it's funny because I had told my close partners and friends about the plan to release that episode, but I certainly hadn't told my mother. Now, when we think about who bought me the purity ring as a child, right? That was my parents, my mom, as a child paying for me to have that ring that I'm now wearing on my ring finger today, right? And y'all, I just don't even know how to clue you into how wild this is that I had recorded that episode, set it all up to release on my birthday. I hadn't told my mom about it. And then my mom actually lives in a different state. So she sent out a gift for me and it arrived on my birthday. And I was able to actually open up my gift from my mom on my birthday. And y'all will never believe what the gift is that my mom got without having any idea that I had recorded and released that episode. My mother bought me a snake ring. Okay, if you have any awareness of Christian mythology and the myth of Satan, the snake, in terms of the Garden of Eden, oh my God, can you understand how radical it was for me on the day that I released my episode about my purity ring and reclaiming that to get a ring from my mom, who has not bought me a ring in any other context, to be quite frank, for my birthday or anything. Literally that day, she decides to send me a snake ring that has deeply satanic and sin connotations to it. I mean, come on, y'all. Obviously going through my deconstruction of Christianity and religion, I am very skeptical of a God figure, right? Or that sort of presence in our world. But oh my God, when I get wild synchronicities like that, the day I release my purity ring episode is also the day that my mom sends me a snake ring. Ooh, that makes me want to believe in some higher power. Let me tell you, because those synchronicities are wild, okay? When Mandy was asking me about spirituality and my spiritual stories, that will be one moving forward that I talk about how meaningful it was to release that episode for me and then on the same day to get a snake ring from my mother. I mean, that timing's just divine, okay, y'all, divine. I am currently looking at my right hand right now that has my purity ring on the ring finger on the right hand and then my index finger with the snake ring. And man, if I've never seen more of a beautiful balance in terms of where I'm at right now with my life and my journey. And so I just wanted to share with you, dear listener, about what a radical divine synchronicity that was, and makes me think more about this universe, certainly, and whatever sort of connections we're all sharing. And so I'm thankful you're in this space. I'm thankful you're joining me because we're probably connected in some sort of higher level way that I don't even understand at this point in my life, and probably never will. But yes, this episode with Michelle is packed with so many good conversation pieces. This is a show about anarchy, right? What does that mean? And for me, anarchy is about acknowledging power structures, right? And when we're thinking about the different ways that power has been internalized, right? Whether we're conscious of it or not, it is there. It is the water that we are swimming in and often frequently unaware of. And so being able to have this space, this podcast where we are examining how power is internalized and impacting our ability to love, oof. Yeah, that's a juicy conversation space. And like Michelle said about anarchy, right? Question everything, dismantle hierarchies, and build community. And I am thankful for you, dear listener, for joining me in that building of community, for sending this podcast to your friends and sharing this message. Truly, it is you and I and together that we are going to change this world. We have to remember that there are more of us, so many more of us than the billionaires at the top. Let me tell ya, that pyramid is really big at the bottom, okay? And people are waking up. We have never had this level of access to the internet, to connection, to sharing ideas for free, right? Like, what a concept. And people are waking up. We are seeing the end stages of the Monopoly game where people are getting frustrated because someone has all the money and all of us are looking around going, seems like this game is unfair. Seems like you're just going to win and we're going to keep going around and you're taking our money. I mean, y'all, if the revolution does not turn you on, I want to invite you to dream bigger, to fantasize more. What would it mean to step into a world of pleasure? A pleasure revolution. Dear listener, I want you to keep dreaming until you feel that response in your body. And we'll keep talking about it, we'll keep learning, and we'll keep exploring in this space. All right, my dear, dear listener out there in the world, let's tune in to today's episode. Okay, well then the first one I usually like to start out with is, how would you introduce yourself to the listeners?
I would just introduce myself as, my name's Michelle High, she, her pronouns. I run the page Polyamorous While Asian, talking about my experiences with non-monogamy over the past decade.
Yeah. And in terms of the conversation, that's exactly what I was thinking. I wanted to ask, like, what has been your journey over the last decade? And I'd love if you could like take up the space to really like tell that story for you.
Yeah. I started doing the non-monogamy thing actively in 2012.
Okay.
I was about 18. Yeah. I mean, it's I don't know, a lot of ups and downs. So my introduction to the term polyamory was through the book Sex at Dawn. And yeah, it was my first boyfriend at the time. He suggested that I read the book. And I had heard of the book. But yeah, once I started reading it, a lot of things just started clicking for me. And I'm like, oh, okay, like this non-monogamy thing. I had always wondered if adults could do a sharing situation with regard to relationships, watching movies and things where there's always like a love triangle or some sort of conflict with other potential partners and lovers and whatnot. Yeah, I always had this question in my mind of like, can adults just share or something? So when I read Sex at Dawn, it's just the more that I read, the more it made sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't turned back since then.
Yeah. I think I've had a very similar experience of you use the word clicking, right? Like where it at least for me, it
Mm-hmm.
just felt like yes, like these ideas, yes, like this makes sense, and it just started. It's hard to describe that like innate sense of calling to these ideas. I'm curious if you
Mm-hmm.
have more words for what that like clicking was when you were first reading Sex at Dawn and seeing this kind of like unfold, this possibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sorry, I'm like trying to fight my cat.
Cats are welcome. Cats are welcome.
But yeah, so I grew up in, oh God, like broken household is such a dramatic
Mm,
term. But yeah, my
yeah,
parents divorced when I was about 6 or 7. And so I think early on I saw how monogamy didn't work. Like it's not that monogamy doesn't work ever.
hmm,
But I saw an example up front of how monogamy didn't work in this case. So reading this book, I think it also appealed to me because they came from like a more like anthropological lens as well, as opposed to more of those like how-to books
sure.
on polyamory. So I think that resonated with me a bit more, trying to think of like, oh, humans have been doing all sorts of relationships since the beginning of, I don't know, since forever,
Hmm.
basically.
Hmm.
And I'm like, this makes sense. This makes sense that there are a diversity of ways to do relationships that isn't just this very typical kind of, I don't know, almost like Christian-y kind of
Yeah.
monogamy, this Western conceptual. It was just like a whole new world. That's what I came away with when I finished reading Sex at Dawn, where it's just like, wow, there's this whole new world of stuff that I've been thinking about in the back of my mind since I was like an adolescent. And it just feels like something that I can do, even though I
Yeah.
tend to be, I, especially as a teenager, like tended to be very shy and withdrawn, pretty
Mm.
private. But even then, like as like an extreme introvert, I felt like I think this will work for me.
Yeah, feeling that calling. Yeah, despite maybe being shy, that like this is something that could be a good fit. And I think, yeah, like you had said, the word broken is an intense word, but these moments where, because monogamy does work for certain people and they thrive in that, but it's so much more so like the cultural scripts of our time being that this is the one way to do relationships, right? And if you have that moment in our own lives where we see that
Hmm.
not work out, you start to ask deeper questions about like maybe there's other ways of being. And I feel like that's something that's been like a repeat idea on the podcast. If you're disabled or you have a different identity, like you start to question the system a little bit more and say, hey, maybe there's other ways. And then hence why something like, Sex at Dawn would resonate so much, right? Like here's this piece that is telling us, yeah, throughout history, it hasn't always been this way.
Hmm.
Boom,
Hmm. Yeah. And I like that you bring up that, like, from, when you have more intersections of, I think, more marginalized identities within society, there is more reason to question why things are the way they are. Like if you fit completely within the status quo, like you may be completely oblivious to the fact that there may be something wrong or just not completely right with how things work because things are working
Mhm.
for you. Hmm.
Right. Yes, that's perfectly put. Exactly like that, right?
Hmm.
So I'm curious, you were reading that book, you said you had mentioned a boyfriend at the time. Like, how did that unfold? What was the next step of that process?
Yeah, so it's God, whenever I like retread this, it's always just like, oh God,
I
baby
know.
Michelle.
I know. I'm doing that every week. I'm like, month-old Nicole
Right.
didn't know shit. Jesus.
Exactly. Oh my goodness. But yeah, so I was about 18, and so my first ever boyfriend, like we had only just met, and it was like a kind of a long distance thing for a bit. And so we were like emailing back and forth and texting back and forth for a while. And like I had never been in any sort of relationship before that.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, when he asked me to read Sex at Dawn, I think I'd already had this inkling, like why he wanted me to read it. And it was like, oh God, like all these red flags, like looking back, hindsight is 2020 and whatever. But he had only read the book maybe a couple months or a few months before I had. So it's not like he was this super experienced non-monogamous person trying to, I don't know, teach me or whatever. It was really like, I don't know, the blind leading the blind.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I read that book. It made a lot of sense to me. And he had a girlfriend at the time. And that's when he like introduced the idea that like he had like a girlfriend and all this stuff and like a lot of really like red flag non-monogamy things. But I was 18, yeah, freshman year in college, very excited to try things and was very excited about a lot of stuff and want to be open to a lot of things. So that's basically how it all started. Just being very curious and very nervous, but also very intrigued and excited by this non-monogamy thing. And especially like God at 18, like he was 32 at the time. So I was like, oh, this older man sort of
Oh,
missed me, which is
yeah.
it's so cringe to think about.
Valuable lessons along the way.
Lessons learned the hard way, but valuable lessons
Yeah.
nonetheless. Lessons that require therapy,
Mhm.
but I learned a lot. Learned a lot.
Yes, 100%. I'm still unpacking where those things are coming
hmm
from. They're still showing up in my day to day about who I'm
Mm,
attracted to. And I'm like, some deep shadow work every time. I'm
mm.
like, what is this? Where is this going and
Right?
who?
Like, whoa.
Yeah, exactly. I will probably get to
hmm
be 90 years old one day and still being like, damn, like there's still more to uncover. Or at least I hope maybe there's some
Oh my
joy there
God.
in that, you
I think
know?
so. I really am a believer that like we keep learning about ourselves and about things until the day we die. Like, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. Death is really the actual end.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. When I first heard about non-monogamy, someone had introduced it to me too. He also was a little bit older, this like artist type that I was fantasizing about. Oh, those
Mm,
ones are so juicy, you know what I mean?
artists, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They play all the instruments. He has such a wide record collection. Oh my God, you know?
Oh, so worldly, so cultured.
I
Yeah.
know, right? And now he's talking to me about non-monogamy. Like, whoa.
hmm
But I mean, my first reaction was like, but you don't love me. Like, I should be enough. Like, you don't love me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I should be enough. If you want anyone else, it's a sign that you don't love me. That was my
Mm-hmm.
first reaction to it.
Mm-hmm.
While mixed also with like some level of like, this is resonating with me at the same time. Like, I want this freedom.
Yeah.
But like the reverse of having my partner have it was like wild to try and integrate.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like trying to remember. I think because I was so new to relationships in general,
Mhm.
I didn't already have like a personal script like
Mm,
for relationships or monogamy.
yeah.
So I think that mm, like for better and worse, I was like naive and inexperienced, so I didn't have a lot of knowledge of myself in a way. But on the other hand, it helps me to be a bit more open, and I didn't feel like a lot of like that those initial like jealousy kind of feelings. Which also, I mean, with the openness thing and the inexperience thing, that also made me a prime target for molding and some grooming. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you feel comfortable sharing that in this space? Because I wonder how many other people kind of like are coming into it very new to these
hmm
ideas and have no idea and like are stepping into that same process.
Yeah, totally, totally. I mean, I have no problem talking about it
Okay.
because unfortunately, like over the years, I've learned that it's pretty common.
Yeah.
Like yeah, in monogamy, it's, grooming and that kind of thing is very common, but like also in non-monogamy, like where people can like collect people, it's very rampant. And also with like polyamory and overlap with like kink community and stuff, also something that is unfortunately too common
Yeah.
and people have to be vigilant about. But yeah, like with my experience, yeah, there's like this older guy introducing all these things to me, and it was very exciting, and he was giving me a lot of attention, and he was throwing a lot of things of like more or less of like you're very smart for your age, and that kind of stuff, like this stuff that
Mm,
feels very complimentary,
yeah.
but is actually right these like early signs of like intentions to groom, even if like in his mind, like I don't think in his mind he's like I'm going to groom this young person. But in his mind, he gravitated toward younger women because, yeah, they have less experience.
Yeah.
They have less, like, quote unquote, baggage. They
Mm-hmm.
have, and really, they have lower standards. Like, I definitely had lower standards. I didn't really know what boundaries were, because
Mm.
growing up, I think I had this idea that boundaries were bad, or were like kind of confrontational, or it was kind of disobedient to have boundaries maybe that
Yeah.
conflicted with what parental or authoritative figures had.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I was going into this relationship with,
Mm.
all of these really open targets.
Yeah.
And then it just so happened that a guy came along and saw those targets.
Yeah.
And that relationship lasted over the course of about 5 years.
Wow.
I think because a lot of it was like long distance.
Mm.
So there was a lot of like slow developments in the first couple years. But we even like lived together for
Mm-hmm.
about 2 years
Mm.
before I realized, like, whoa, this is really bad.
Yeah.
And I say this a lot, but like when I describe this time in my life, that it's no coincidence that I finally got out of that relationship after I finally finished college, after I got
Mm.
my first full-time job, so like some more financial security. And in that time, I had found a couple other partners who were much more stable and a lot more sustainable and healthier. And so, yeah, it's really no coincidence that in that year where all that happened, that I realized and also felt comfortable enough to be like, oh, we need to stop seeing each other. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which makes me like just hold space for all of the people that like, I mean, one, the financial piece, right? Like that's
Mm-hmm.
huge. It's huge. It's huge how
Mm-hmm.
many people will stay in relationships because of that. And, the systems we're under, and then that creates yeah, 100% situations that happen like this. And then the other half of it, I was thinking about, like, as you were saying, learning boundaries. I'm over there in that camp too, like, didn't know those, right? Like, learning that process, like, from like a psychology lens, like how do we learn that, right? At least like my theoretical background would say that we grow in relationships. So you need other
Mm-hmm.
relationships to show that to you, maybe a therapy relationship, maybe good partners, maybe good friends, other people. But otherwise, we're just kind of like sitting in the dark with the patterns that we learned from childhood of how to interact. So it's like, I want to ask, like, how do we help people get there? But then it's like, y'all need relationships, right? Like, and that's kind of what you're hitting on, is how these like other partners really like changed the game.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Like, so when I first started dating this guy, there was like an explosive thing when I told my mother about it. And like at the time, like even at the time, I understood why she had such a strong reaction.
Yeah.
But of course, it's a lot more clear now. And like a lot of the things that went down in that conversation, it was just so intense.
Mm.
And there was a lot of like I pushed back a lot, because even though ultimately they were right in that this guy was not good for me, the reasons that they were listing just didn't resonate at all.
Mm.
And there were very kind of extreme reactions, emotional reactions of like, if you drop out of school and you get on drugs or you get pregnant or whatever,
Oh.
like you are not allowed in this house anymore.
Oh.
So from that, I got this idea that like I can't tell my parents anything. I
Mm.
can't turn to them for guidance.
Yeah.
And so I have to do this alone, and I have to do this on my own. And then it also, because because I have this like stubbornness streak in my head, um, that especially like at 18, 19, and then into the early 20s, this sort of pride of like, okay, I got into my first relationship and that first relationship needs to last, or else I'm
Mm.
just one of those naive little little
Yeah.
teenagers that, got in way over her head and
Sure.
failed at relationship at her first
Mm.
go. And so I also
Mhm.
had that in my head,
Yeah.
which encouraged me to stay for longer than I should have. Yeah.
That reminds me of like that investment. Do they call it investment fallacy? I don't know. The
Sunk cost.
return.
Yes,
Yes,
sunk
exactly. That's
cost. Yes,
exactly
yes,
what it
yes. I
is.
think about that all the time.
Yeah, we put so many resources into this, and I'm not going to walk away, right? So hence that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm also thinking like how painful to get that message from your parents, right? That you'd be like cast out. That's like one of the scariest things we can have as
Mm-hmm.
social creatures, is that we're like being taken away from the herd and from the community. So that's so hard that you had to do that on your own. And it makes me wonder, like, how do you meet people in that space? Like, I guess
Mm-hmm.
that's my job, but I'm asking you too, like, how do you meet people in that space? Do you have any advice that you think when you look back on that time in your life that would have resonated with you or kind of got some sort of movement?
Oh gosh. I think growing up for myself, growing up, there was a lot of like having to raise myself a little bit. And
Hmm.
I'm also like an older sister, and so having to be like little mother
Mm.
oftentimes. So in my circumstances, I think I had already from a young age
Yeah.
stopped reaching out to my mom for a lot of emotional support,
Hmm.
or for guidance or anything. Like I never asked for help with homework and whatnot, because I found it just easier to try to figure it out myself, especially past a certain stage where it's like, I know my mom won't be able to help me with
Right.
this anyway.
Right.
um, so yeah, for myself, a lot of it was from an upbringing of thinking that I had to do a lot of things by myself,
Mhm.
and that it would just be too much work, or just that I couldn't, or that I wouldn't be able to explain it well enough
Yeah.
for other people to help.
Mm.
So a lot of it is rooted in that. And then in general, like the past 10 years has definitely changed with regard to access to resources.
Mm.
Because like back then, I feel like the only books that were out were like The Ethical Slut and More Than Two. Like
Right.
those are the main two in the poly canon. Like that was basically
Hmm.
it.
Hmm.
And now these days we have like people on social media, we have people talking about it in more mainstream articles and news and whatever. And there's so many more books, and there are
Yeah.
podcasts, more people talking about it.
Hmm.
So there are more resources to direct people to,
Hmm.
which I think is great. Like there could always be more. But yeah. That's definitely a difference in the past 10 years. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when we're having conversations like this, right, when people are talking about it, especially you had talked about kink, right? Like
Mm-hmm,
there's
mm-hmm.
a whole shift even in that community from before the internet to having space to have conversations about what was going on in the community on the internet, and people becoming more aware and having more access to ideas and stuff like that, right? So like there is this huge cultural shift that is happening as we're getting more access to stuff like this, that I think is helping us to kind of recognize these red flags much sooner. But then we're still walking in the blind, right? Like, what are the ones we don't even see right now? You and I
Mm-hmm.
sitting here that we just don't even know yet. Or at least that's been my
Mm-hmm.
process. I feel like every time it's like I uncover a new one where I'm like, "Oop, messed up there. That's great. Let's keep going on the mountain. Let's keep going."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's just like a very human experience,
Yeah.
right? Like to be human is really to make all sorts of mistakes all the time. Again, like
Mhm.
until we die.
Hmm.
Hmm.
But it's interesting that this conversation was happening. I was at least thinking about it in the last couple of days of like this idea of, not to put any sort of like monogamy versus non-monogamy stance on anything, but it's interesting that sometimes in a monogamous framework, because that's your one partner, that you're not, all people do monogamy this way, right? But like some people put all of their emotional focus into that one partnership, and sometimes they don't realize that they're not being treated the way that maybe they could be treated. I think that
Mm-hmm.
non-monogamy, not to like re-emphasize the like malleability of like collecting partners and or shifting through people, but like also at the same time, like there is this space where, like, at least in my lived experience, when you're connecting with multiple people, you might notice that someone starts to treat you a little bit better, and then you might look at that other relationship and go like, well, hold on, why aren't and like that sort of
Mm-hmm.
like evolution process that we have as we like step into better and better relationships with people.
Hmm. Yeah, totally. Like, it really made a huge difference having a couple other partners. Like, while I was seeing my first partner, like, it took me a few years to like get into the groove of it, because I was like,
Mm.
because yeah, I tend to be not like super social,
Okay, yeah.
tend to be fairly shy.
Yeah.
Also, he was like the first person I'd ever had sex with, so
Oh
it's like,
wow.
so I just didn't have a lot of experience and didn't have my groove or anything.
Hmm.
But yeah, finally, with one partner, I've told him like, oh, I appreciate that, like you do this and this and this, and he's like, what? But
Yeah.
that's just basic. I'm not even doing anything. Like,
Oof.
yeah, and it's just
Yeah.
these very common, like kind of courteous things. And he's just like, no, 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 no. Don't compliment me for that.
Yeah.
Because yeah, like there were things that were even below the bare minimum. The bar was on the floor, and yet my first partner like had a shovel and was almost determined to dig under that bar.
Yeah.
So yeah, finding even like common, I don't know. I don't like to use the word like common sense or common courtesy necessarily, but something that for someone else just feels so basic, where it's like, oh,
Mhm.
I'm not even doing anything intentionally. I'm just not being an asshole.
Yes. Yes, and I
Mm-hmm.
I see that in my work. I think that's what's interesting, right? Is like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
someone will be talking about something and I might just gently say, yeah, we can have compassion for ourselves for like those moments when we mess up, and they're like, oh, that's so kind of you to say, like, wow. And I'm like, oh, those
Oh.
yeah, yeah, data, you know what I mean? So then you're
Mm-hmm.
just like,
Mm-hmm.
interesting. So I think that, like, I don't know, the theory says, we grow in relationships and we need good relationships to leave the bad. Sometimes I like when it's
Yeah.
so simple like that. I
Oh
like, there's
yeah.
in psychology, there's like Freud, and you can get into the deep psychodynamic. They
Mm.
start using terms, yeah, yeah, and then like the feminist movement of psychology, like really like simplified. It's like you need good relationships to leave bad. I'm like, that hits. That
Mm-hmm.
makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can follow that math. Yeah,
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 exactly. The math adds up, right?
yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Like a big part of my personal work is really being able to reach out and to accept help from other people, and
Love
like
that.
the co-regulation piece, because
Mm.
like I like growing up have been so good at managing myself
Mm.
and feeling like I was the only one who could fully manage myself. And so like it was either unwise or it's just like, I don't want to burden other people by putting this on other people. But it's really been a game changer. Like, oh, I can rely on people. And then these feelings don't feel bad as long. Weird.
Yeah.
Like I can actually work through these feelings rather than have them fester and then pop up later.
Mm. Mm.
Weird.
Yeah. And if you're anything like me, though, like that still feels uncomfortable at times for me. Like sometimes I'll like push back on someone when they've said something and like say, "Hey, that bothered me," or that offended me in that way, and like, and then I have this internal reaction of like, "Oh no, did I hurt their feelings? Did I rah, 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 rah?"
Right.
And it's like such
Yeah.
an act of discomfort, even though I would say it's the accurate thing to gently tell someone like, "Hey, that crossed a boundary," or "Hey, this," but like at least for me, I've just noticed how significant the discomfort is of that growing process. I'm curious if that resonates with you at all.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a lot of like there's a lot of this idea of like not taking up too much space,
Yeah.
as women or people like raised in a more like feminized experience of just like, yeah, you don't take up too much space. You do take up more of the emotional labor. And then there's a lot of this kind of gaslighting of like, oh, am I being reasonable or unreasonable? Like someone was telling me recently with like an experience they had with someone where she was asking him like, oh, I just want to make sure you feel heard and that I want to be heard. This guy was like, what the heck are you talking about? Who talks like that? And when I heard that, I'm like, oh my God. But I think many of us are taught not to take up space. And so we feel
Mhm.
like we're made to be the bad guy if we do
Mhm.
take up any space, if we do
Mhm.
demand any sort of, it's like, it's not even like that much emotional labor. It's really like this opening, this invitation to do emotional work together.
Yeah.
But I think like all these gendered roles and whatnot, and also this focus on hyper individualization, where it's like, yeah, everyone's got to take care of themselves, and you're a burden. You're looking for a handout, like, kind of that mentality. If you need other people's help, or you're like
Mhm.
lesser than, and like all of these narratives that come together that make it so difficult to be in relationship. That yeah, that's why I don't put down monogamy at
Right.
all or anything. And like, especially in this environment that we live in, it does feel sometimes that it's like, oh, we're lucky to find one person that like really clicks with us and resonates with us in a healthy way. How could we possibly ask for more?
Mm.
So yeah, I mean, this a little rambly, but like, yeah, I still find it very difficult to approach or address conflict because I
Yeah.
was always told or shown that conflict is always bad. That people
Yeah.
being mad means there is a bad guy. That, yeah, something did something wrong and it has to be chastised. And so yeah, I tend to be a gestator. And so whenever even like something feels wrong to me, I feel like I have to go away and think about it by myself for a little bit. And then I'll come back, or maybe I'll do it over text and being like, hey, can we talk about a thing? I've been thinking about something.
Sure. Which is probably the reasonable space to do, right? Too, like, because it's like we can't, this is where like TikTok psychology gets really complicated, right? Where they're like, just say everything that you need to say in the relationship, don't hold back. And it's like,
Ugh.
it's like, whoa, like big asterisks to all of that, you know what I mean? Because like if something happens and there's some sort of conflict, like the answer is not to be like, well, you're a horrible person, like I can't believe you said this, and like unleash all of that. The other thing is like the answer is also not to not say anything and to like completely turn inside and allow the behavior and not say anything about it, right? Like there's some nuanced space of like, hey, like something happened. Maybe I need to take a moment to step and be alone with myself, to regulate for a moment, take a deep breath, or ask that person, like, hey, before we talk about this, I'm noticing in my body something is happening. So can we take a deep breath together before we talk about it? Like there's just like so much nuance here that I get worried about these TikTok videos, and they're just like, just say it, just say what you need to say in the relationship.
Right.
I'm like, ooh, maybe take a breath first, maybe.
Right. I mean, I feel like we've definitely seen a rise of people who, because these terms are more widespread, which can
Right.
be good, like the flip side is that people can then start to dilute them or start to like twist them or weaponize them. Like this whole thing with like, oftentimes I see people like using boundaries,
Yeah.
like twisting them in a way it's like, that's not actually boundaries. That's like just more kind of this sneaky way to try to control or manipulate other people.
Yeah.
This
Yep.
isn't really about you, actually. Yeah, it's right. Like the, social media, TikTok and all that, like it's a great way to spread information like wildfire sometimes. But when there isn't enough nuance or there isn't enough like research, outside of that, if people just take things at face value rather than like, oh, being like, oh, this was interesting, I'll go Google something and learn more about
Yeah.
it.
Right.
Yeah, it's pros and cons like everything else.
Totally, absolutely. Like I'm all here for free access to education on content. I think we're gonna go in a better place. I hope with that. I try to stay joyfully optimistic that like all of it, regardless of the milieu, of the messiness of it, is gonna bring us to a better like collective consciousness, because we're kind of hearing kind of like we started, right? Like these red flags now that we would know in the community because of this. And how that can kind of like raise us to like a different level of understanding, catching things much faster. Like all those memes about the relationship anarchist. I'm doing my dissertation on relationship anarchy. So like all the relationship anarchy memes of like, well, like this is my experience and I don't, that's why I do relationship anarchy, so that you can't have commitments and expectations with me.
Oh,
Like, I know, right? It's like, first off, that's
yeah.
relationship libertarianism. Let's talk about that. You know what I mean? Like, hold on. But like beyond that, it's like then using these pieces, right, as like sort of like pawns to like get out of, the basic expectations of a healthy relationship and commitments to one another.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think almost since the beginning, when I've got into non-monogamy and whatnot, relationship anarchy was always had like this bad kind of a
Yeah.
haze around it, because like it's one of those things that is a really great idea and then people almost immediately started doing bad things with it.
Yeah.
It was very quickly. Yeah, doing like all the things you said, where it's like, oh, just it's all no strings attached. There's no accountability. There's no responsibility. It's just casual, and I'm just gonna flit around, and nobody can tie me down. Blah blah blah. And so, I think that was one of the reasons that I was hesitant to like fully embrace the term relationship
Totally.
anarchy. Like it always resonated. Like if I read, like the Andy Norgren's like that manifesto, it
Right.
all resonates.
Right.
And like I had always for a while, and I still call myself this, where it's like I call myself solo polyamorous with like relationship anarchy leanings. I feel like it's similar to how I describe myself politically, where it's just kind of like leftist, and but also maybe maybe communist, but also like I think I would be a communist, but I haven't done enough reading.
Sure.
And so like with relationship anarchy, the political aspect of it, I think is very important.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there are a lot of people who use the term without taking into account the political aspect of it. Like you were mentioning relationship like libertarianism, where it's like that is really what a lot of people who use RA like
Mm-hmm.
that is what it is that looks like a lot more. And so I think when people try to take the politics out of it, it kind of defeats the purpose of relationship anarchy. Like I love thinking about this where it's like the personal is political and like no relationships exist in a vacuum. So
Right.
all relationships are political, even if they don't feel like it.
Yep.
So it's like, yeah, with relationship anarchy, I really love that people are identifying it with it more and more. I just hope that people are still keeping it within its political context as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which has been an interesting thing to like unfold in my interviews with people who
Mm-hmm.
practice, like to ask like what is that political context and like see the different range of how people like see that, from, decentralizing, sex and romantic connections as the way that we connect, right? Because I think what I've liked about relationship, and this is so fun. I hope this is fun for you. Like I get to
Oh
talk about my
yeah.
date. This is fun. Okay.
Yeah.
The ways that like monogamy versus non-monogamy, like that framework puts it into a sort of like bifurcation, right? Of like
Mm,
you're either this kind of connection or this kind of connection, which means we're placing the ways that we look at relationships as what like sexual versus non-sexual, romantic versus non-romantic. I mean, obviously that's not taking into context asexual folks and all the other ways
mm-hmm.
to connect, right? So it's like even that like dichotomy is like really based in that sort of way of looking at connection. So like if we step outside of that lens to a whole new world that maybe doesn't even put it into that like you're either this or that, like then we're creating
Mm-hmm.
space to connect on all the different ways that intimacy can be, right? It's like one piece of the political to like the full other side of the political, which is like this is going to deconstruct the ways that we've built the families and everything into like this is where I'm like I'm not to talk poorly about the practice of monogamy because there's nothing wrong with the practice of monogamy, but the way that we have structured the means of resources and connection into dyads is kind of scary
Mm-hmm.
because we need community structures. And that has nothing to do
Mm-hmm.
with monogamy and the practice of sexual fidelity. It has to do with this practice of like, are you connected to a community or not? And because of the way that like our systems, private property, et cetera, have built us into these like private you own your home, you have your lawn, you have your own whatever, and it's just the two of you and your little family. It's like broken apart like the community connections and like
Mm-hmm.
getting back to that like anarchy of the community piece, which I still feel like I don't know enough about. That's still part of my I'm doing the results right now and I'm like I got to look up more
Yeah.
anarchy theory because I don't
Mm-hmm.
even know. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, no, like like yes to
yeah.
everything that you said. Like, I love that. And like you've probably noticed this feel like in the past few years where there are some people who aren't even identifying necessarily as polyamorous anymore. They're
Mm,
identifying as like relationship anarchists.
yeah.
And like that term resonates with them more than like polyamorous.
Yeah.
Or that like there's this false dichotomy of like monogamy, non-monogamy, as if they're like these
Mhm.
two black and white
Yeah.
sort of pieces where relationship anarchy can still fit with like a more romantic or sexual like exclusivity in a way. Like it doesn't
Mhm.
have to be like polyamorous.
Mhm.
Like monogamous people can practice relationships in a much more like moving away from more like toxic monogamy and mononormativity
Yeah.
and really expand the idea of relationships even within monogamy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why like so many best practices within non-monogamy like apply to monogamy as well, because it's just like good relationship practice is good relationship practice.
Mhm.
And like you were saying, like with the nuclear family and people living in the suburbs,
Yes.
and people being so spread out,
Yes.
and we can only rely on our little family unit,
Mhm.
or we have to find community in things like church or whatnot, which can be a bit problematic sometimes, you know. And so yeah, so then we become desperate to find community in all these
Yep.
places where this community might not actually be ultimately healthy, but it's better than not having community at all. Like
Mhm.
it's better to be in a monogamous relationship in the suburbs than to be alone or
Oh,
something.
absolutely.
Yeah. And it's like I don't fault people for feeling or thinking that way, because that means capitalism is working. That means a lot of social systems are working.
Yeah.
These are all by design. This isn't all just like a happy byproduct. This is all by
Mm-hmm.
design. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then maybe the labels to talk about that is like toxic monogamy. I want better labels to talk about these ideas, because it's like, because I think within our community space, like the ways that we are conscious to not attack or critique monogamy, because it's a beautiful practice that people thrive in and enjoy when there's community connection, right? The person who practices sexual fidelity and has that whole community of people around them and like thrives in that. That's great. It's like, I don't know what word we need to describe for the suburb, right? Like the suburb monogamy of this sort of like, it's just you and that one person and your dog or your kiddos out there. And like, that's it. Like, I think that's the scarier piece that needs like more critique of, if we could get a better word for what that is. Because when we say monogamy, then every monogamous person goes, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. It's like, we're not talking about that practice. We're talking about the black hole that kind of happens, which I would say is like against our social nature of the reality that like, regardless of what you're practicing sexually or, any of romantic, if you're not, if you're asexual, like you need other people. One person will not meet all of your needs, just hands down, just confident to declare that, I will say.
Yeah, as humans, we're so social.
Yeah.
Like, and uh even though according to the news and everything with climate change or whatever, we're very good at destroying ourselves. But like part of the reason why we've lasted, this long is because of collaboration. And because
Yes.
humans are very good at working together. I I believe that human nature is not inherently bad. We are
Same.
driven to do quote unquote bad things in certain situations because that's what we are led to believe, like this is the way and this is what we have to do in order to survive, being basically brainwashed under like a scarcity mentality while also manufacturing scarcity and like
Yes.
infighting where it's like, oh, poor people fight poor people, and like, yeah, marginalized groups fighting amongst marginalized groups while like rich assholes are like just sitting on their mounds and mounds of cash that they could never in a lifetime
Yeah.
spend.
Yes.
But we're all squabbling over scraps. And so we're too busy to think of a better world. We're too tired to
Yes.
imagine a better world.
Yes.
We are, and also the social pressures where it's like, well, if everyone around me is in they live in a suburb, they have a house, they got married, they did the thing. And what am I doing? What am I a loser for not doing all this stuff? So yeah, there's the social pressures on top of that, where it's like they don't like work doesn't even have to be done anymore. It's just the gears are turning and it's just happening. And so yeah, oh God, it's like it's all so there's so many huge topics to think about with regard to relationships, and it's like it doesn't even have to do with non-monogamy necessarily. It's
Right.
just it could be any sort of relationship, our like coworkers, friends, family, our neighbors, people that we maybe just meet once in the street or whatever. Like even those connections, like even that matters. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I'm resonating with so much of what you said, and I could pick apart probably all of them, talk to you for hours about it, I'm sure. And I love to put my faith into the hope and belief that humans are good, right? Like that inherently humans, like we were kind of saying, we want to work together. We want to be in this state of pleasurable connection with one another, which I would say is not fighting in that like stressed out nervous system response, but the reality of living in a society where there's a scarcity mindset. Maybe a more accurate way to say that would be not even mindset, but forced scarcity based on the systems, right? Like, of course, this is how we get into a space where this is how we're reacting and fighting and all this sort of stuff, because that's what the system thrives on. I saw that that video, I wonder if you saw this, about like the Titanic submersible and the tragedy that is, of course, right? But like the reality of the, I think it was $250,000 for the ticket, right? And for it, I think it was for a billionaire. If you put that into what they get paid compared to someone who makes $40,000 a year, and you try and compare those up to see like what's the cost of that $250,000 ticket for the billionaire compared to the person who makes 40,000. And for them, that's a cup of coffee.
Right. Yeah.
To
Drop
what?
in the bucket. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I can't even imagine like right now, like making $250,000 in a year. Like,
Right?
wow.
That's a cup of coffee. I just spent that over the.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I guess, and I get angry too because then therapists do like sliding scale stuff where we're like, we need to give access to all people so that they have services, which I 100% agree. And then it's at the other end, like, why are therapists the ones sitting in the middle though of that? And the reality that like we should also have sliding scale up, because if someone can do that for a cup of coffee on
Mm-hmm.
their cost, then like those people should be paying accurately for the cost. So that's even for what we're doing for the sliding scale down. Like, it's just like so many people who
Mm-hmm.
are trying to do this, like, I want to help, I want to help, I want to help, get in this space where then they're the ones suffering with the pain of that reality to do that, while other
Mm-hmm.
people are just like on their yachts having a good life. And I'm like, damn. Damn.
Mm-hmm. Right. And there's all this mentality that like, oh, these people deserve to be able to not have to worry about that because they worked really hard for that, right? Like like to make money is a moral good. It means that you're like really smart. It means you're really savvy. It means like, I mean, there's all this like that like bullshit social Darwinism kind of stuff built into it. And so yeah. And so I mean, this is the stuff I really like to talk about with regard to polyamory and non-monogamy and
I love
stuff,
it.
where
Yeah.
it's like I feel like there are enough people talking about the jealousy aspects and like how do we deal with metamors and all that. And that stuff still needs to be talked about. Don't get me wrong. Like a lot of the nitty-gritty of like polyamory logistics is still very important to talk about from a wide
Mhm.
variety of perspectives.
Mhm.
But yeah, this is the stuff I really like to chew on. Yeah.
Right, because it's what maybe we need to do if we want to create that new future, right? Like, I don't know what that new future
Exactly.
is. I was just
Mhm.
straight up walking to Target earlier this day, and I was like, how are we gonna do this? Like, how are we gonna take this down and like build this? Like, just
Mhm.
walking through the aisles by myself, and I'm like, I don't know, right? And so it's like,
Mhm.
I think it's conversations like this and like the collective like vibrations of people realizing more and more of these systems and
Mhm.
becoming aware because of the internet, right? Dark light gives us all the good and the bad, but like people are waking up.
Yes, I mean, I think especially within the past few years, I think you saw a lot of people having like a bit of a rise in class consciousness a little bit. There's definitely a difference between how people think like now versus like 2019. The
Mhm.
awareness that a lot of people have now versus 2019. Like there are definitely people who are still who's definitely still buy in to everything, but like a lot of people woke up
Mhm.
and were made to confront a lot of things and were made to see like the vast inequality that
Yeah.
isn't just like, oh, this is the natural order of things. Like, no, there's something wrong going
Mhm.
on here. So yeah, I hold on to hope because I feel like it's better than the alternative.
Yes.
But yeah, like conversations like this and helping people realize that there are options. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that you have to choose a specific option, but there are more options than this.
Yep.
There are more options than like the relationship escalator,
Yep.
and that's just steeped in like heteronormativity and mononormativity and metanormativity,
Mhm.
all the normativities.
Yeah.
There's more. There's
Mhm.
more, and it's a lot of it is easier said than done, and a lot of it is there are a lot of privileges that go into being able to explore alternative relationship styles also,
Yeah.
but there are options. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why I feel like I always try to take the lens of informed consent. And I think that comes from my like
Mm,
research experience, right? Where it was like when I'd be consenting people to research studies, I would have to give them the full, here's the risk, the benefits, the yada yada. You get to make this choice, informed consent, voluntary, right? Like I think the nuanced conversation is that because of mononormativity, we have not been given the informed consent that there are other options available and both have risks and benefits. And at the end of the day, you get
hmm
to choose, right? And so, like, at times I proclaim so loudly the like non monogamy piece because we didn't have that informed consent. But then the more nuanced of that is like people get to choose, right? And so like my second piece of this that I've been thinking about is like pleasure. Like what is the model that brings you the most pleasure, and how can you tune into your own body, your own wisdom, your own intuition to follow that thing that spoke to you when you first had those click moments, when I first had those clicking moments after I got over the fact that like someone could love me and someone else equally, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like it was such a, like an authentic calling that I started going, and like, man, I love my life. Like I swear to God, like I love how I'm building my relationships and the freedom that I have, and like it feels so good. And one of my close friends is like thriving in monogamy and loving it and having such a good time. And I'm like, yes, like both of us, like this is what we need to do, is like follow whatever that is to you and like keep going down it. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, exactly. Like, yeah, I love my life. Yeah. Like when I think about my life, even just like 2 years ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago, where it's like, wow, all
Yeah.
these things that like at 10 years ago, I couldn't even have imagined for myself.
Yeah.
And now I'm doing it and it feels great. It's not
Yes.
without obstacles and, working through stuff, of course, but like, wow, I'm just so excited to see what like this trajectory, where it takes me.
Sure.
Because if like I'm doing this now, uh,
Exactly.
what levels can I unlock, even in 1 year from now? Like it's there's so much potential. There's really, I feel like that's like the best part is like how freeing and how liberating thinking about all the options are. And it's also the scariest part, I think, for a lot of people, where
Yeah.
it's just like, oh, I don't have just the one script to follow anymore,
Yep.
and I have to make all these very intentional decisions at all of these choice points.
Yep.
Like, holy crap.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think my partner and I spent like, Jesus, like 3, 4 hours like talking about the dynamics of our relationship, because I'm embarking upon like another connection with someone, and like just the differences between like, when you have a dom sub dynamic and embarking upon that sort of dynamic with maybe someone else, and having multiple doms and other sorts of pieces and all of that. So like there's just so much to talk about as you're stepping into all of this, right? So it's like, yeah, there's so much, I would say, like, I don't want to use the word work. There's so much like exploration in all of it that we do when we're talking with partners, of like constructing these worlds and being conscious of how they affect other people and all of that. And like, yeah, I don't know, give another year, like what exactly my relationship structure will look like. At these points now and how I'm trying to construct relationships, I just hope that whoever I am connecting with, I am making intentional relationships that will last a lifetime, regardless of what shape or type of connection it is. If we go away from a sexual connection, or shift from a platonic to a sexual or romantic, or whatever those labels mean, because like who's going to define all of that, by the way, just to be clear. But for language sake, you know what I mean? Like, I just hope that whoever I'm building with, we're going to last. Like, we're going to last through it and figure out some way for us to all be in connection with one another.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I feel like over the years, yeah, the lines between like what is a partner, what is a friend, what is
Right.
this and that has
Right.
just become blurred, and it
Yep.
has become less and less important to me. What's more important is just like, okay, well, what do we want to do with each other? Like
Yes.
that's it. Like I don't necessarily care what a person calls me, or because I use like partner as a blanket term.
Sure.
And then sometimes I'll be like, oh, partner friend, a friend partner, a sexy
Yes.
friend.
Exactly.
Like what?
Lover.
um
Yeah.
but yeah, because like the specific labels are not important to me. They do not necessarily help me situate myself with this person. It's more
Right.
of just like, oh, well, what do we do?
Yeah.
Do we share more emotional like vulnerability with each other? Are we more sexual with each other, more romantic? Do we just like to go to movies together? Like, do we maybe talk to each other once, maybe twice a year, but like the connection keeps going?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just all the different possibilities and all the potential. Like I love just letting relationships be whatever they're going to be. And again, like, some people think that like, oh, that means you don't communicate or whatever, you like go with the flow. It's like, no, like we go with the flow, but we talk about the flow.
A big conversation
Yeah,
about the flow,
we
multiple hours about the
exactly.
flow.
Right. And like over time too, it's like you don't
Yes.
just have like one big conversation. You're just like, no, we're talking about it all the time. And I'm one of those people who like loves that. I love talking
Yeah.
about relationships
Same. I
with the
know.
people I'm in a relationship with.
Yeah.
Like It's so fun.
And personally, nothing makes my pussy wetter than that, honestly. Like when
Oh
I
my God.
really get
Yeah.
connected and close and feel seen and know that we're kind of like going on the same trajectory, which is change. By the way, like get comfortable with like we're on this trajectory of change that's going to evolve over time. Like,
Yes.
man, I've never felt more seen. I've never felt more close. And I'm like, yes, please come get this. Like it's wet.
Right. Exactly. Like, oh my God, we're on the same page on everything. Like, let me jump your bones
Yeah,
now.
exactly. Exactly,
Hmm.
exactly. And like, yeah, I was just journaling that the other day, kind of what you were saying a few like moments back in the conversation too, of like, I don't know where I'm going. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
I know, we know we're building our intentional little world of people, right? But like,
Hmm.
I don't know where that's going to go in the most beautiful and exciting way because like if there's been this trajectory at least for me of like a evolution in terms of like my ability to be in connection with one another in terms of intimacy and boundaries and communication like if this is going on this like upward trend like yeah, take me to the moon. Let's go. Like
Hmm.
this is very exciting. I don't know how we're going to get there, but like I love that like we're growing in relationships.
Hmm. Exactly. And it's like last month, like someone like de-escalated a relationship with me and like, but to still be like, oh, friends. And the conversation was so good. We like talked on the phone for like an
Good.
hour and it was like there were still laughs and everything.
Yeah.
And going away from it, I had to sit because I'm like, am I actually feeling okay? Or am I doing my avoidant thing where I'm like
Mm,
shelving it? But it's been a while, it's been long enough. And I've talked to my therapist too, where it's like, no, I feel very okay with it. Where it's like,
yeah.
even in the conversation, I was like, okay, like, we aren't like romantic partners or sexual partners anymore, but like, we can still go to karaoke together, right? Like,
Right.
we can
Right.
still banter and laugh and like get dinner together every once in a while or get boba
Mhm.
or whatever. Like,
Mhm.
that sounds fine to me. Like,
Yeah.
it's not like I have to, in your presence, stop myself from trying to jump your bones and it's going to be a problem. It's like, no, I'm still going to enjoy doing all these other activities with you because
Mhm.
that's just what the relationship is. And I'm totally fine with that. And it's just
Right.
like mind blowing to think about that this can be what life is. Where it's like
Mhm.
these shifts in relationships can happen and they don't have to be the end of the world. They don't have to
Yeah.
trigger a movie montage of like crumpled tissues and watching watching trash TV
Yeah.
in a depressed state on my couch. Like it doesn't have to be that way. And it's yeah, it's so freeing. It's really incredible. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. But that doesn't sell as a movie. You know what I mean? Like
No,
that's
no. Where's the conflict? Yeah.
me and my partner clearly and calmly talking for multiple hours, right? Or that like de-escalating into like, yeah, we're going to karaoke together. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
how boring. But like at the like the reality is what you're feeling, what I'm feeling is like, how amazing. Like these are relational
Mm-hmm.
skills. Like, and if man, if relational cultural theory says anything, it's that like relationships form your quality of life. And like if we continue to
Mm-hmm.
get better relational skills, like at least personally, my quality of life is really good. Like I really love the beautiful people that I have in my life that I can go to and talk to and have intimacy and connect with in all the different ways. Like that's the Hallmark movie I want.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think this is why, like, to reiterate the point of like, going back to politics of like, I think this is why it's very important to talk about politics with relationships because like politics is basically the discussion about like who gets what, like how we
Mm,
distribute resources,
yeah.
and like influence. Yeah, who gets
Hmm.
to decide that, and then who gets what. That's what relationships are. Relationships are kind of a microcosm of just like the larger political sphere. And so, in order to have better relationships, like we have to acknowledge like the larger systems at play, the larger
Hmm.
pressures at play,
Hmm.
and then vice versa too. Where it's like if we look at the larger systems at play, we are better able to interrogate how we approach and move through relationships. And yeah, it makes our relationships better. It helps us, hopefully with those relationships organize together
Yep.
in order to affect the change and try to make the world a little bit of a better place. Yeah.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Absolutely. I think, do you know about Dr. Ruth?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I had
Mm-hmm.
watched the documentary about her, and I remember at different times, everyone's on their own things, but she had talked about how like, oh yeah, I do sex, like I don't get political. I do not get political. And I'm like, the personal is political.
Right,
it is
right.
right there, Dr. Ruth. Damn it, So like as someone
Mm-hmm.
stepping into like the same sort of like field, I'm like, the personal is political, and like there's no way to like extricate that from everything that we're doing, from this conversation, from the larger systems we're dreaming about. And I think, at least for me, there's reasons why, like, even though I call myself a relationship anarchist, I put, in the description, like, I'm non-monogamous, right? Like, in terms of getting people to like come in and understand the conversation and join and start to think about these ideas, like there's political pieces like that, right? And like, what does it mean when I'm saying that, like, in this podcast we're exploring sex, relationships, and liberation? Like, what is relationships? I think when you say that word, a lot of people are like, oh, you're a romantic partner, you're a romantic partner. And I'm like, no, like, what is your relationship to other humans? What is your relationship to nature, ecology? Like, maybe one day I'll cover climate change. I don't want to get dark and, but you know what I mean? Like, that's an important piece of it too. Like, what's your relationship?
It's all connected. Yeah. It's all connected.
Yeah. Your relationship to spirituality, to God. That shit starts to play into your sex life real fast, because am I having sex to create from the Heavenly Father who's ordained our connection and our marriage and to do this? Am I channeling things? Am I doing sex magic? Right? Like there's like all this sort of stuff. Like I don't think you can, like, not to hit on Dr. Ruth a little hard, but like I just don't think you can do sex without getting political and looking at the relationships to these larger structures,
Absolutely. And it's very interesting because like Dr. Ruth, like one of the reasons why she's an icon, it is because like the political reasons. Like it's shocking for like someone to speak so openly about sex, a woman to speak so openly about sex, an older woman who, like, the conception is usually, I don't know, there's a lot of like prudishness attached to this image, but like she's just talking very openly about it. And it's in today's political sphere where it's like a lot of education is being attacked, of like, oh, are they grooming our children in schools? I mean, the state of sex ed in schools has been terrible for forever, and there are very, very political reasons behind that. I mean, like all the things around relationships and sex, like, yeah, we cannot we just can't separate that from politics, because with regard to like healthcare and everything, like those are very political things, and it's all related. Yeah.
Oh, totally. And when we come into the field of psychology, who's going to be like, hey, you have the issue, something's wrong with you and your libido. And I'm like, well, maybe climate change is stressing you out. Maybe the fact that you're stressed about affording your meal is stressing you out because of these systems. We can go back to, the billionaire part of this conversation, like maybe the system isn't made for your pleasure. Let's be honest about that one. You know what I mean? Like, I just get angry when we put the blame onto the people, right? Rather than the larger systems. And so I think like you said, like it has to be grounded in this level of conversation. Otherwise, we're placing blame on the individual and like not really hitting, like, like sexual assault prevention work starts with education. It starts with education. And then my whole thing has been like the whole healing continuum of even that process is to enjoy pleasure and to be thriving. And so for me, that means kink, you know what I mean? And like when I get those 1-star reviews on this podcast, I respect people if they think this podcast is trash. I get it. You have your own opinion, but like 1 star feels aggressive. You know what I mean? Like you're putting out quality, like some sort of level of quality content. Maybe 3. You know what I mean? Like maybe 2, but like 1, I'm like, ooh, you feel scared. You feel challenged. I don't know. Maybe I am 1-star quality content. What do I know? I don't want to toot my horn. Jesus.
Oh man, but yeah, like it's like. Yeah, with therapy, like what if we're having a reasonable reaction to a lot of like the messed up shit that's happening?
100%.
What if we're having a very reasonable reaction
100%.
to like being forced to spend 40 plus hours a week having to create value for someone else to make like a bunch of money off of us, and then we get the scraps, and then we've got to bootstrap our way through life, through relationships, trying to thrive instead of survive, crossing that threshold from survival to like thriving. That's huge. And yeah, like what if depression or anxiety and all of these other things, it's like, what if that is your just human natural reaction to being surrounded by fucked up shit?
Totally. And the relationships, right? Like when we go back to like
Mhm.
the relationships we grew up with, yours, mine, ours, like all of those created, that wasn't us. It's not like we like grew up with that, DNA there. I mean, the epigenetic research is pretty fascinating.
Oh man.
There was like one study where they had conditioned, I think it was mice or rats, one of the rodents, to be afraid of cherry blossoms for the first generation, and then didn't do that conditioning for the rest, but then bred them out. And it was either 3 or 4 generations later, they were still afraid of the cherry blossom smell. So like, I do think there's some like nuance to the reality that like it might also even be your genetics, right? But like at the
Yes.
end of the day, it's like it's not you. And I think that comes back to that faith in that humans are inherently good. Like inherently we want to work together. Inherently we want to be in good relationships. So whew, yeah, what a
Yeah, I
nice,
mean,
yeah.
oh God, I feel like it feels like a triumph whenever like even one good connection is made. Because it's like, oh, it opens up the possibility for like more good connections to be made. I think, yeah, with like connections with real depth and commitment to, supporting one another mutually. We aren't taught to do that because we're not incentivized to do
Nope.
that. It's a lot of we're incentivized to like take care of ourselves and,
Yeah.
like screw other people.
Hmm.
So it's, yeah, it almost feels like a miracle when it does work out well sometimes. But yeah, gotta, stay hopeful.
Well, because it's happening. Like, look at you and I having this conversation right now. Like, I don't know.
Hmm.
I'm gonna make the assumption that you have a community of people that love you, that are having the same value systems, that are growing. And I frequently look at my friends, I'm like, yeah, what a privilege we have that like this is our community where we recognize and have
Hmm.
nonviolent communication and other sorts of
Mm.
things, about this. Like, there's ripples every single time that we have these
Hmm.
conversations, every time that you have that conversation with someone on the street, the friend that you call in for closer intimacy, even when that means boundaries, right? Like
Hmm.
those have ripples. And I do believe that like the same ways that like we're growing into this and learning, like other people are learning. And like collectively, when we do that as a whole, there's so many more of us
Mm.
than there is at the top.
Oh, absolutely.
Oof, revolution gets me
Absolutely.
turned on. Fuck. I'm like, Jesus, there's so much more of us. There's so much
Hmm.
more.
And it's like, of course, if we try to like tackle these on our own or in small groups, like it's not going to
Not gonna
work. But
happen,
like,
yeah.
it's really like the messages from like A Bug's Life, it's like there are like so many of us and we're very strong together.
Yes.
If we can figure out to like work together toward like a common goal or a common enough goal, common enough direction, like we
Mhm.
can really achieve so much, but there are so many systemically made obstacles
Yes.
that prevent us from doing this.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's an uphill battle, but I don't know, like you definitely see pockets of people doing a lot of good work, and that helps me remain hopeful.
It's happening. It's happening.
Hmm.
I want to hold space too because I know that you also wanted to talk a little bit about what it means to be Asian and polyamorous. I know that feels
Mm-hmm.
like maybe like a side, it's obviously not a side track because it's all connected to the intersectionality of all this,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
wanted to hold space too since you had messaged that that was something you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I mean it really like intertwines with a lot of what we've been talking about with
Yeah.
like relationships and politics and
Mhm.
how different marginalized identities, like how that affects how we can approach and be in relationship. It's like, I mean, I think, anything that I want to talk about with regard to be like Asian and polyamorous, we've kind of talked about in like the broad strokes
Yeah.
already. And also, yeah, I like that you brought up like epigenetics. Like epigenetics is so wild. Within our lifetimes, like the rise of epigenetic science, yeah, I feel like that's been happening like within our lifetime, where
Mhm.
before it's thought that like, oh, no, like there is no leftover thing that's transferred from the parent to the child aside from
Mhm.
just like genes, but you can't transfer like feelings or whatever in genes. Yeah, in like evolutionary science and whatnot. But yeah, like, I mean, just speaking of the United States, like, people of color here and like all the racial trauma that's passed
Mhm.
down,
Mhm.
and class trauma that's passed down. that just surrounds us. And I think a lot of us are very hesitant to embrace that idea that a lot of it is already just ingrained in our genes, because it seems to take away a lot of agency from us.
Yes, exactly.
And that can be very scary. And I can see why people like push back against that. And of course, like we don't know the exact ratio of like the whole nature nurture thing. Like, how much of it is in the genes? How much of it do we have control over? But within the non-monogamy space, even though there are more resources these days, you can definitely see that certain perspectives and certain people are still favored when it comes to like who we listen to or who we make viral or who we support. Yeah, when it comes to sharing resources, a lot of them are white, a lot of them are cis het. There are a lot of triads as well, and I don't have anything against triads specifically, but they're definitely an overrepresentation of triads and thruples in like mainstream representation of polyamory. It's like, God, like triads, there's a lot more than we can do than that. And also triads are very difficult. So it can be kind of misleading that they're fairly common on like the social media space, because like that's like a high level relationship thing.
Totally.
That's not like a beginner relationship thing. Monogamous or non-monogamous, like whoever you are, like that's not a beginner relationship.
No, lots of intersections going on there.
Yeah, so yeah, all these intersections and different marginalizations. Like earlier you were talking about like, disability, and how like, again, with the political stuff where it's like, in what was it, 2014, 2015, we had quote unquote marriage equality, but like that was only with regard to like same-sex marriage basically. And people with disabilities still have to struggle with the marriage thing, because like, oh, if you get married and you suddenly both have too much money, you lose disability benefits. And like all these benefits just seems like such a euphemistic term. For like, for resources that you need to survive. So yeah, just I don't know. I feel like my brain is just like trying to go through all these different things. Like instead of just talking about being Asian, there's just so many different intersections. And again, just harping on this like the political aspect of relationships, desirability politics, like who gets to have dates, who gets to be seen as conventionally attractive. There's just so many topics. I mean, like you said, like these things we could probably talk about for hours and hours and still find other threads and whatnot, because this really does encompass so much of life in general. So it's like you can really tackle this from a billion different ways. But yeah, like I always encourage people to try to seek out a greater diversity of voices. Like we're out here, and diversity of thought and of perspectives, it just enriches the experience. I don't know, I feel like it helps foster further connection. And in summation, just there are a lot of different voices out there, and I think people could work a little harder to try to find more of those perspectives that aren't upheld as much.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how we thrive, right? Like I was thinking of the metaphors of ecology, right? The more we take away like all of the diversity of our species and our biodiversity, like our planet is falling apart, right? And so it's just it's like we need that diversity of thought, of ideas, of perspective, of lenses to be able to like truly thrive.
Right, like seeking out this diversity while also focusing on like common threads.
And like you said, I mean, I hope this space where I come in and meet with other amazing, beautiful people who can have these conversations, like I hope. Sometimes I get worried. I'm like, am I going to have enough content to run this for a lifetime, for my lifetime? But then something like this, I'm like, yeah, I think so. I think there'll be enough to talk about throughout the journey. Yeah. And so like, go ahead.
And yeah, like things keep progressing. I mean, like the world around us keeps changing, so there's always going to be something new to talk about.
Exactly. That's why I've been telling my guests, like maybe I need y'all to come back at a later date. We'll check back in, see where we're at. What are we chewing on now these days?
Oh man, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I want to hold a little bit of space as we come towards the end of our time. I always check in just to make sure there wasn't anything on your heart that maybe we didn't hit to, you didn't get the space to say in the conversation. So otherwise, I have a closing question I ask all my guests that I could bring us towards.
Yeah. I mean, we covered a lot. And so I feel like we covered a lot of what I wanted to talk about. I mean, really the emphasis of like the personal is political and all that. I feel like that is like a main takeaway that I want people to have like all the time.
Beautiful. And I really enjoyed getting to connect with you and feel very seen in your understanding of what I had shared. And I always appreciate those moments when I find like fellow souls who kind of like just get it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Likewise.
Yeah. Well, then the question I will ask you, as I ask every guest, is what is one thing that you wish other people knew was more normal?
And
I'll date. Oh, go ahead.
Oh yes, no, go ahead.
I'll date myself by saying that this was like my thought around like the Yahoo Answers question I was typing in my little phone as a kid, going like, "Is this normal? Is anyone else out there?
Is this normal?" Yeah. Well, I think we should embrace the fact that humans are very weird. We're a very weird, kinky animal. Like, not necessarily an animal that's more special, but like, I think all animals are a bit weird. Humans are very weird. Yeah, I like to push back against this like more quote unquote civilized conceptualization of what humans have to be or should be.
Yes.
Humans are really kinky. Humans are really weird. Like, and not just in like a sexual and romantic space, but there are more weirdos out there than there are like, I don't know, quote unquote normies, because I don't even really think that normies exist. I think there are a lot of people who have convinced themselves to become normies because that's what's incentivized. But the brain is an incredible engine and comes up with a lot of weird shit. And so like, if you're thinking some weird stuff, or if you have a different perception of what the world is like, what life is like, it's likely that other people at least have a similar deal. Like there are 8 billion people in the world now. Like we're all really, really weird. And it's very unlikely that like you're alone. So yeah, I think it would be helpful for more people to embrace the fact that humans are just weird as shit.
Yes. Yes. It's almost become like, I think, a little running joke on the podcast. Like whenever someone like pushes back on the normalize question to say like, we're not normal, we are weird. I'm like, you are an anarchist.
Right. Question everything, dismantle all hierarchies, build community.
Yes. Past. Where would you want to plug so people can find your content and connect with you?
Yeah, so I primarily live on Instagram, so at Polyamorous While Asian. And then I also, if I ever post something to the feed, I'll also put it on my website, polyamorouswhileasian.com, so that you don't have to just live on Instagram. But yeah, that's where you can find me.
Great. I'll have all of that linked below in the show notes. And it was such a pleasure to connect with you today.
Yeah, it was great. Really, really enjoyed connecting with you and talking with you about a lot of different stuff. Yeah.
So juicy. So juicy. If you enjoyed today's episode, then leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. And head on over to modernanarchypodcast.com to get resources and learn more about all the things we talked about on today's episode. I want to thank you for tuning in, and I will see you all next week.